Hey, I'm Johan. In my career, I've worked for companies that were tremendously successful, but unfortunately, I've also worked for companies that didn't make it. And I was thinking the other day about the ones that didn't make it and wondering why. And obviously, there are many reasons why companies fail. But today, I want to talk about the top three reasons that I've experienced in my own career. So let's start. The first one, which I think is also the most important one, is failure to manage people. People are the single most important resource in any company. Yet many companies fail to manage their people correctly. And I get it because people are complicated. Trust me, they're really complicated. In fact, they're the most complicated thing you'll ever have to manage. A million times more complicated than any piece of code or technology. But in my humble opinion, any company that doesn't manage their people correctly is bound to fail, regardless of how much money they have in the bank or how great their idea is. Now, when it comes to failures of managing people, I kind of saw two big buckets of where companies fail. The first one is they don't have the right amount of people, and the other one is they don't have people in the right position. Now, let me explain. Having the right amount of people isn't just about hiring as many people as you can, which usually has nothing to do with how many people you actually need, but has to do more with ego and a desire of some managers and some founders to be able to say, hey, my company has X amount of employees or I manage X amount of people, which is really makes no sense. Because having the right amount of people means that you have to understand that too many people is just as bad as too few. In fact, I think that having too many people can be much, much worse. Now, I'm going to use the sports team analogy, which if you ever worked for me, I love using it, but I really think it fits in this particular case. And the analogy goes like this. If you were a coach of any sports team, you'd have both a lower and upper limit of how many players you need. You're not going to see a soccer team with 50 players on it. It just doesn't make sense. Most teams will have 22 players, 11 players who play on the field and 11 on the bench. And the same goes for basketball or American football. Now, the risks of having too few or too many people is that when you don't have enough people in your company to do the work that needs to be done, you risk burnout because people are just working way too hard. And eventually what happens is you build a product that has too many unfinished features. And I've seen that. I've seen companies that didn't have enough people and we were never really able to finish anything. But when you have too many people, you have people who don't really have enough work. And what happens, they are inventing things to do that not only slow you down, but also really complicate your business, which in the long end can be really, really damaging. So what's the solution? My rule of thumb is when it comes to having the right amount of people, I never hire anyone if I don't think I have enough work for them that can cover at least 40 hours a week for 6 months. If the answer is no, then I would prefer to maybe just get a contractor for a short period of time. And you have to remember, hiring people just because we have a few stressful weeks is not good for them because what happens after those few weeks? They're just going to be bored, and that's a recipe for disaster. Now, the other bucket that I see is having people that are not in the right position. So every company that I've ever worked for that had serious issues suffered from this particular management failure. Not having people work at the position they're best fitted for. And again, let's use the sports team analogy because I really, I love it and it also fits here. Since when you are a coach, and you're part of a sports team, most of the time you're going to have players in specific positions. Even if those players can play other positions, it doesn't matter. And there's a reason for that because in order for a team to have peak performance, people need to occupy the role where they excel. And the same thing applies to organizations. It's the same principle. As a manager, you need to work to people's strengths and not waste time having them do things they clearly are not good at or even want to do. Now, this might sound obvious to you, but you'd be surprised how many companies, probably also the company you work for, have people occupying roles, and sometimes really important roles, but they have little to no skills. Now, the next failure I see with companies is the failure to manage process. Now, when it comes to process, I always say that you want the process to work for you and not the other way around. And how can you tell if you're working for a company that has a bad process? Is that if you ask someone that work at the company for a reason of why you're doing something that really doesn't make sense, and their only answer is, well, we've always done it like this, then you know you have a problem. Now, don't get me wrong. People don't have to agree with every process. In fact, that's not even possible. You're always going to have people that don't like the process. But people they must understand why a process exists and the context behind it. Because otherwise, what you have is people serving an almighty process instead of the process making their work easier and better. So, what's the solution? In my point of view, is you want the process to align with the company's culture and the vision. And a lot of time it really has to do with the founders or the CEO vision. Because if the vision is, hey, we want to be like Apple, we want to only release a very few products a year, but each product is the highest quality possible, you're going to have to hire people who like to work like that. And the process is going to be probably more of a waterfall, lots and lots of QA. But if your vision is super agile, like Facebook, where you're releasing new features every week and you're working on production and there's not much of an emphasis on quality control because you can fix things in production, that's a different set of people and definitely a different set of processes, which probably will be a lot more agile. So really, you have to make sure that the process fits your culture, the people you hired, and most importantly, what you want to do, the kind of company that you want to build. Now, what you don't want to be is what I think is the worst, what I call the corporate startup. And that's where you have a company that both wants to be really fast and agile, but on the other end, they are implementing really big company processes, which obviously is the worst of both worlds. Last but not least, failure to manage products. Companies that fail because they don't manage their products correctly, you've seen millions of those. But for me, the reason that I've encountered most often is kind of simple. It's the lack of a healthy feedback loop. And what do I mean by that? A product without a continuous feedback loop is doomed to fail, because at day's end, if people don't know and are not interacting with each other in terms of feedback, it's really hard to know what's important. And many companies will have this chronic disconnect between the people who build the product and the people who manage the company. And this lack of feedback within a company is why product lines often will fail in the market, but everyone who worked on it knew that it's going to fail months before it went out. And that's really, really sad, because when you think about it, it's kind of like people wasted months, sometimes years, working on something when they knew it's not going to work. So as a manager, one of our most crucial roles in the success of our company is to build and maintain a healthy feedback loop between our team and all the different stakeholders that we interact with. And I know this can be difficult, especially if the feedback isn't positive. But I'd take negative feedback any day over a failed product launch. So one thing that I always do as a manager is I require my teams to do a demo at the end of the sprint, and I ensure that all stakeholders are invited. Now, this may seem obvious, but you'd be surprised how many companies don't have end of sprint demos, or they'll have a demo, but it's kind of one of those positive only feedback demos where no real valuable information is provided to the team. Teams need feedback. Not just positive feedback, which is, of course, very important, but also constructive criticism on what we did wrong and what we need to change so we can better serve the company. By not providing us with your true feedback, and this is what I tell managers, you're not protecting us. In fact, you might harm us in the long run, because when the product fails, we might lose our jobs. All right, I hope this helps you, and I'll see you next time. Have a good one. Bye.